Hi there, Randy Green here. A little bit of otherworldly news on March 20th. It is equinox, in the Northern Hemisphere at least, spring equinox, and in the Southern Hemisphere, you are now going into autumn. So anyways, this is not what I want to talk about. It's just the day. The numbers are interesting though. It is a 2511. So for those of you who are into the whole rotundum and the numbers, which you can find information about on my website, the whole Academy website, under the whole transition science classes. There are the whole advanced class 2, the rotundum dynamics for free, which you can begin with if you would like. But that's not where I want to go today. Where I want to go today is I'm working on the advanced clearing work where I'm diving deeper into the technologically enhanced genetics, the different configurations, the original energy systems of the fourth and the fifth cycle before the fall of Atlantis, and then the reconfiguration that was done after the fall of Atlantis and the reseeding of the fourth and the fifth cycle of our current time scale or a time frame, which of course were hijacked 15,000 years ago and altered into what we now know as humans as we know of them today. Anyways, I'm working my way back through these different configurations to try and find access points and solutions, how we can recreate the original transformative energy system, which I explain in details from the beginning of the courses of the whole transition science classes, and then following the 9 courses building up to the transformative energy system itself. I know there's a lot of information to go through, but it kind of dawned on me today while I was working with the distorted dimensional energy body that are the configuration of the adaptation processes that were done to the energy system during the times of Atlantis. And I know there are many different conceptions of what Atlantis was and all these kind of things. For me, Atlantis is a part of the 5th cycle after the timeline event, where different other groupings of humanoids from other constellations and other parallel systems began to enter into our solar system as part of the restoration program, which is where I'm working from the attempt to undo the effects of the timeline event through different cycles that then collapsed, unfortunately, during the time of Atlantis because of the incoming races and their reconfiguration and some of the issues they brought with them. And that is the whole big debate that leads to the understanding of the other stellar races that are here calling themselves our ancestors, and they are our stellar families and all of these kind of things, which they are for some of you that are the descendants of the reseeding of the groupings that were here during the fall of Atlantis and were reseeded into different adapted configurations. And some of you are part of what we call the military projects and the adaptation and modification that's been done to the Atlantean holographic overlay configuration that were inserted into the original transformative energy system. That's what I'm working with in the advanced clearing work. And for many of you, that's completely new levels of information, which is why I suggest you do the basics first. And if you want to jump them or don't do these, then you can just do the whole transition science classes, which you need to understand the advanced clearing work. Without them, it will not make much sense, because this is digging into our true history, at least in the timelines that are true to me and are connected to my understanding. But what came with this was, as I worked through the 5th cycle before the fall of Atlantis and that configuration, its original form and not the distorted versions that are out there now under the crystalline races and their whole attempt to revive some of the Sirian B type of genetics that were part of that holographic overlay during the time of Atlantis, which were under what we understand as the Sirian Bs, whereas the 4th cycle reseeding after the fall of Atlantis are under the Sirian A's. And then, of course, we have this whole discussion of who is entitled to who and what and whatever. But where I wanted to go was this understanding of the original Pillar Project and the original programs that were run on this planet as the restoration program. This is the digging I'm doing, the scientific recreation of these original sciences to undo the effects of the timeline event, because The whole program of the restoration program was to get rid of the timeline event energies and then get back to the original density energies and the original cycles, and then try to restore what had been damaged and undo the fragmentation of the original consciousness units and the original holographic unit, energy units that were dispersed and reconfigured and fragmented and reassembled in all sorts of wrong ways using third cycle types of energies, which allowed to link up to what we call previous cycles that had failed, and by that brought in consciousness configurations that led to what we call the darkening and the mind, the ill-mindedness and the failure dynamics, reversing the original energy system instead of being progressive, then beginning to make it regress and reverse it and pull it back in time into the third cycle as a kind of strong engine that constantly pulled the progressive dynamics backwards, and with that distorted it and turned it into what we call a reversed version of itself, which is how the reversed pentagram came to be. So the restoration transformative energy system, which is what I'm working with, is the original attempt to undo these dynamics, and my attempt to recreate that the sciences behind it, the understandings and the programs and what we're supposed to do are complicated work and is theoretical, and theoretical issues, that's where we begin. And then the difficulty, of course, come in the whole implementation process. But where I wanted to go in this little video here is I'm pondering upon some of the original dynamics of the restoration program, as well as the Pillar Project, and how the Pillar Project was built up. And you know that from the whole philosophy book, as well as the New Grand Cycle Transition Course 1 and 2, which is part of the whole basic course material on the whole academy. And that was this whole that we had 6 cycles in the Pillar Project that were going before the timeline event and the fall of Atlantis. But let us do before the fall of Atlantis and do after the timeline event. We recreated 6 cycles inside the restoration program. And with that, we put in some kind of fail-safe mechanisms that ensure that if you were part of the first cycle, which were hit hard after the timeline event, and the second and third cycle, you would only gain access to that level of information, which that follow these first 3 cycles and pillar projects that were recreated to restore the heaviest effects of the timeline event. And then we had the 4th cycle and the 5th cycle after the timeline event, which went into what we could call more collective features that goes with the 4th cycle is all about community settings. Just do it in a simple way to work within teams and to work as groups to undo the effects of the timeline event, transforming the reality grid and transforming reality due to the sciences that should have been learned in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd cycle. And then in the 5th cycle, we would do the holographic teaching systems and we would do the different developmental programs. And to get to that level, you would have to be able to work in teams, and you would have already recreated your own template and transformative energy system structure, so you would know what you were doing while you were working to recreate the original technologies back to the original configuration, following the original construction, the original purpose of the Pillar Project. And that's where you can place me if you want to know where I fit in. I'm not this whole community kind of thing, been there, done that, but my main focus has always been on trying to recreate the technologies, and if not possible, then ensure that they did not fall into the wrong hands. So in that, there are this, when we talk about both the Keylontic sciences as well as Alex Collier, and I'm not talking about the people that have put this information forth, we'll just leave them do whatever they are doing. No, I'm here talking about the different humanoid races that are part of these teaching systems that goes with the 5th cycle before the fall of Atlantis, and goes with the restoration holographic overlay energy systems that were built in that 5th cycle that are connected to these different humanoid or stellar races from other systems. And what these groupings have come back in the stellar activation cycle and prior to that, and trying to activate these configurations as an attempt to avoid the complete devastation of this fifth cycle, which we are unfortunately getting closer and closer to, which is why we have this whole shift out into the parallel universal matrix structure, and all of the other races are pulling their projects out, and whatever's been going on here, whatever will be left will be the ones that have no option of literally leaving, or are to do and complete their end cycle here, or have chosen to stay and complete their end cycle, and many other plethora of reasons why people are stuck here or remain here or choose to be here. You pick whatever suits your configuration and your issues. But when we talk about one of the things I remember, because I listened to Alex Collier, and I know there are people out there saying a lot of stuff and what have you, but he has been one of the foundational information systems that I looked into and I found valid, and I found him very informative. And I always enjoyed the older videos that Alex Collier made back when he was in contact with the Andromedans, which came from the Andromeda constellation and not the Andromedan galaxy. Huge difference there. So they were he mentioned they are blue skinned and they live on these planetoid crafts because their own system has been completely destroyed in different galactic wars and what have you, which is one of the key issues of our system. Due to the timeline event and the ill-mindedness and the failure dynamics and the reversal into third cycle type of mentality that were enormously warring and territorial, that all goes with this whole kind of conquering space, creating technologies to conquer space, and creating different forms of toroid technologies, spaces within spaces, the ability to create universal structures, and all of these kind of things that went quite south in the third cycle of our universal lineages. But when we talk about the Andromedans that came in, and I remember Collier, I think it's that great lecture he holds on the ranch. You can find it on YouTube, where he talks about how these Andromedans have read our crystal discs. And these crystal discs are the discs that holds our history. They are part of the planetary library. They're part of the original construction, as well as the Calantics, where Dean also talks about that the Guardian Alliances are reading our crystal discs to get the information from where she's teaching from. And then you can look at the information she derives and or she gets from the Guardian Alliances, because she's not deriving it, but the Guardian Alliances are deriving information from these crystal discs, and she then gets it as downloads. And Alex Collier, he got from the Andromedan and what they share with him as information as they have read from our construction and its original library. And then those of you will say, well, are these the Akashic records? And I will say no, because the ones that have come forth in later times, Edgar Coyce as one, pretending to read these Akashic records, he was reading, in my opinion, because he was in deep trance. So my best guess is that he was linked up to some of the false matrix and some of the false memory programs, which I would see as the Akashic records. But if you go back to the original Hindu teachings that goes with the understanding of the Akashic records, and these were some of the things that the Hindu priests, the old Brahim races that were specific lineage that were allowed to read the Akashic records. Were they reading the disc of the library, or were they reading the information systems that were within their racial grids? And that's the question I think we need to ask. And I think the latter. I think they were reading their own racial memories of that Akashic record, because Akasha technically means this spectrum of light that is around our planet, which in my opinion are connected to the astral field. And astral also means, as you have an astral level, it's Latin and it means a star, and that astral terminology has come from the esoteric teaching systems such as Blavatsky and Alice A. Bailey that use that terminology of the theosophical community, which we can discuss whether or not that is correct. And they're also talking about the Akashic records. But what are we reading when we're reading this? I go more with the crystal discs than the Akashic records. As I said, I think that is lineage reading system through their psychic energetic capacities some of the ancient priesthood lineages had as they linked up to these ancient racial grids and were able, through their version of the holographic overlay of the fourth cycle reseeding races after the fall of Atlantis and what they had stored within their own lineages and within their own local libraries that were connected to their specific lineage. And they were reading that. And eventually, I think it was taken over by some of the Naga races that came in of the Syrian A-type and some of the TGs that developed through these different wrongful use of energy. And their Akashic records are, in my opinion, not something you should link up to. I think that's part of the distortion fields that are part of the false intersected matrix systems that are part of our planet that people link up to and then get connected to false timelines and false memories and false historical programs from where they then derive information, but what they're technically linking up to are a huge matrix of what we call android, gray, regress races, hijacker, old world order, harvesting races, using that for their own purposes. And these are some of the things I'm working with in the Advanced Clearing Work series. Okay, so what I want to go with the whole crystal disc when I use Alex Collier as an example, not Alex, nothing to do with Alex, nothing to do with Dean, but the groups behind them that read the crystal discs. When you come from the Andromedan constellation that has its own, it is part of a parallel universal matrix. It doesn't belong to our solar system. It doesn't belong to our universe. It is an access point into our universal matrix. That's why they come in crafts. They technically don't exist within our solar system, which if they did, they would be on one of the planets or part of our planetary system that is linked up to our solar system as part of our original configuration or construction of reality. And they are not, so that's why they're here. They are blue-skinned, indicating Syrian origin. We have the blue-skinned, the black-skinned races. We also have brown-skinned races of the Syrian type that has come in during the time of Atlantis, and we're part of that. And why did they come back? Well, Collier mentions that he used to be a warrior and fell in one of the wars here, whether it was the Galactic Wars or we had around 12,500 BC or earlier, perhaps 14,000. Time varies, all depending on the density of reality on the day we're talking about it. So time is flexible as well. When we go into the whole, if you do Einsteinian sciences, you know, time depends on the relativity, the speed of light, and the energetic state that you're in, whether or not you're under the heavy gravity, dense gravity, or you are above in a lighter speed or a higher speed of light, where gravity will not slow down time to the same degree, and therefore you will have a different molecular state that will allow you to run more with the speed of light, and therefore you will go into a higher configuration, which will then alter time. And instead of having this expanded time as we have it in dense energies, you will have a different perception of time, which you see in the movie Interstellar, if you want a little bit more down-to-earth explanation that you can kind of follow with. So the reading of these discs, when we go with the Andromedans, I'm not going to say these are the whatever or whatever. It doesn't matter. This is just what was loaded up into off imprint within Collier while he was doing that lecture, which I think is a splendid lecture and on many degrees. I always enjoyed it, and he is humorous, and he's doing a lot of good explanations that are suitable and still suitable, to be honest, to a large degree. But that's not what I want to discuss. I want to discuss the reading of these discs, and I keep circling around it because there's always a lot of background information. But you see, when we did the Atlantis project, and I keep claiming I was not part of it, but to some degree it probably were, at least some of the developmental programs that ran with it. And one of the security mechanisms that was in the Pillar project was that if you were in the first pillar, that's pillar 1 to 7, where you work from what we technically call level 1 to level 7, not dimensions, but level 1 to level 7, where you go through the basic steps of how to work with the template structure and how you need to develop your energy system within this solar system. That's part of the Pillar project. And you learn to adapt your original genetics into the configuration of this solar system, etc. That's part of the Pillar 1-7. And then, of course, after the fall or the timeline event and the reversal of the genetics and all the things that happened there, then that became part of the restoration program, where we'll learn anew how to adapt that original, what we already learned, and adapt it into what we needed to work with now after the timeline event and the implications that had on our genetic structure. When we talk about genetics in these original races, we're hereby talking about code systems, light filaments, molecular structures, vibrational radiation energies imbued with holographic units that would then be able to link up to consciousness structures that were part of our original template, and how to re-engineer that one to be able to link up to the transformative energy system using some of the Pleiadian and Sirian technologies to do so, and how we could adapt the original configurations into the transformative energy system, and figuring out how to undo the effects of the timeline event, undo the fragmentation, get rid of the third cycle imprints, and get rid of these types of failed genetics that linked up to some pretty horrible types of technologies that we left behind in the third cycle, and trying to avoid them to come back in, creating what we could call different gate systems. I don't work with wormholes because I don't believe in the Einsteinian sciences of time, and therefore I don't believe in the bending of space, and I don't believe in this whole Einstein-Rosen bridges that they created as a speculation, working with partially quantum sciences, but also Einstein sciences and the whole relativity of time. I do agree with the density setting, the speed of light, and how molecular states are altered, all depending on what density you're in. But I don't work with the concepts of gravity, because even though I do believe that gravity is part of what keeps us to the planet, in that understanding of something that keeps us stuck and prevent us from floating into space, I more believe that's part of the configuration and of the original sciences of our construction, which would more align with the magnetic field and the different forms of magnetic pull that is from our biological, electromagnetic body that goes with different forms of configurations that aligns with the Earth's magnetic field. And then you will say, well, if the Earth's magnetic field ceased to exist, will we then float into space? And I would say definitely not. But the whole gravity sciences, in the way that Einstein, in my opinion, interpreted that, going back to Newton, is for me, as I see it, not accurate science. It's partially, and scientists know that. They are not saying this is accurate science. They say these are the steps of the sciences that we need to develop to figure out what the actual reality is. And we are building bridges back to what the thinkers that has gone before us. And that is always a good idea. So you don't float and think you invent the deep plate, as we say in Danish, when you're actually just repeating what others have thought of. But I still, the gravity thing, even though they say, oh, we found gravity waves and we know there's a gravity field, I still believe to a large degree, and I mean that, not believe, I mean that lodges into my understanding of the construction that we are existing within, that if you have great thinkers that work together as a team, they will begin to create a developmental program that is use of consciousness. And since they are using such advanced technologies that are built upon alien technologies such as the Hadron Colliders to work on the quantum field, where they will alter the possibilities into creating these dynamics that they have prophesized or mathematically created the code system of course, then you will get a gravity field. Of course, you will get a Higgs field. But this is again my opinion, and I know scientists will say no, definitely not. But I hope that in the future, some of these people that are doing this will truly understand what they're actually tinkering and tampering with, and what they are creating in the hands of the different transhuman races that needs us to have the concept of gravity, that needs us to have the concept of the Higgs field, because that is built by the technology they have provided. Some of the secret groupings, the covert breakaway civilizations that are working with the enhanced human genetics, that needs that type of field to be able, that type of quantum field to be able to create these configuration of the enhanced genetics that will then lead into some of the systems that are very mechanically and technologically oriented. So you're technically creating the foundation of biotech that goes with nanotechnology, that goes with quantum fields, that goes with the ability to timber with the original configuration of our system. Just to put it very shortly, sum up in a quick explanation without going into further details. The original program were made in that way because of the timeline event, that you would only gain access on the level that you had developed your consciousness structure into. That meant that both in the Pillar Project as well as in the restoration program, that those who had gone under the circumstances of the effects of the timeline event, if they had got access to all the, for instance, let's take one that had a fifth cycle understanding within the fifth 11 pillar program, had gone through all the first 4 cycles and had gotten to that point where he or she, again, gender is not vaginas and penises, but a specific configuration of the 5th and the 4th cycle, where you could say the 4th cycle is what we call a little bit feminine. You work in teams, you learn to mentor, you learn to take care of others, you become teachers and all these kind of things, where the 5th cycle is more individualized within that teamwork, where you begin to unfold your different proficiencies and the different purposes and functions you have chosen for yourself within these developmental programs, which is needed for to be able to go there. You need to understand everything there is to understand about the solar system before you're even allowed to begin to create developmental programs, because that individuality and that specialization can only be put into a program that is for the highest good of the many if you have the full understanding of what the many are and what the highest good is, and by that have gone through the other 4 pillars, that each and one of that has 7 layers. So this is technically going up to 12 layers, but the higher 5 would only be added on when you had done the restoration program and got into the original 12 lineages, which would then be technically the crossing between when you were in the 1-7 pillar, you would at the 6th level, you would begin to work with the 6-12 pillar. When you were at the 4th level, you would begin to work with the 4-10 pillar, etc., etc. So that were rearranged after the timeline event to secure that the ones that had the infection on the higher levels would not be able to link up to the original technologies, even though they were already in a state of infection, to put it that way. They were already tampered with and had begun a deconstruction process due to the timeline event, because the technologies we had at the time were not only energetically built up, they were also connected to different forms of consciousness configuration, which meant the creator of them were technically linked to them. So if the creator got hit by the timeline event and were drawn back and began to develop ill-mindedness and began to develop symptoms of what we call 3rd cycle warring, superiority, service to self tendencies, which was what we struggled with in the 3rd cycle, well, then that person would be excluded from the programs and would no longer be able to read the discs of the library. That person would no longer be able to get that information system that would go in and endanger the entire configuration. And I hope you're getting my point here. So when we're having outsiders from other systems that are coming in and reading these discs, even the Guardian Alliance, which is a group of different humanoid races from other systems, they are saying they are the angelic races from the Tauran system, right? So with that whole coming in and trying to find solutions within the Atlantean programs, the 5th cycle before the fall of Atlantis, trying to link up to the libraries they had access to before we got into this state that we are all in now, where most of these races have lost their own systems and are floating around in deep space in crafts and not having home systems anymore, because they have gone into complete fail systems and are now in their decay cycle. Well, then coming here to try and adapt the information systems of the restoration program, try to come here and harness that information, that technology, by working with humans, by tampering with the human genome, by creating new holographic systems, linking up to different clones in the artificial 4th dimension, or linking us up to holographic matrices and artificial timelines in the 5th, even though timelines technically go with the 4th cycle and the 4th artificial 4th dimension. And then tampering with the energy system, creating false teaching systems and trying to get that out and providing it for free on the internet and what have you. using different symbols and sound configurations to put in motion put in the symbol, make people work with that, link them up to the cube system, give them the sound frequencies, the different songs they have to sing or what have you, and then you put the vibration in action, and as the symbol begins to vibrate, it will begin to spiral, and then we'll link to the cube, and then the cube will put in the information systems, and people will get information from within, and then that will go in to activate the radiation field, from where they will begin to resonate and activate these different symbols into a creational process that should link them up to the old overlay systems of the fifth cycle before the fall of Atlantis and the racial grids that were there. But what these races are not taking into consideration is the fall of Atlantis. Because even though you go back in time, what we call back in time, but you're going back between the cycles and you use the original gate system, and you manage to get through these gate systems, not wormholes, but they are gate systems. They're holographic in feature. So if you can create the right configuration of the right genetic sequence, as well as the right radiation type of energy, and create the correct spiral movement, where you can then open a gate system from one level of one cycle into another cycle, creating the intercyclic bridges that are possible, then even though if you would get back to before the fall of Atlantis, you would still have that timeline event feature in these genetics. And even though you were able to take these groupings and these energy systems and get the configuration, the code system of these types of genetics and get it back through the gate and into the current time and reseed it into humans under the military projects, would that then recreate that type of genetics of the fifth cycle before the fall of Atlantis and the current fifth cycle? That's an absolute no. Because in between then we had the hijackers and the Dracos coming in, tinkering and tampering with the holographic teaching systems of the reseeded fifth cycle races. So, and that were under the Dark Ones, the Dark Avatar, the Phantom Matrix. So no matter how we twist and turn this, going back in time and just trying to take what's there, replicate it, and reseed it into current humans using specific programs they have designed by what they have read from the crystal discs does not give the answer. I would say that, again, when we talk about what was in essence, when I think the Andromedans that talked with Collier were what we call of the more benevolent type, because they were definitely, they were trying to get to him to say, you're one of ours. Don't you think it's about time you get out? And we don't really know how much of his higher order levels that actually got out, and whatever's left in his physical form are the remnants of what he used to be. We don't really know that. That's just my interpretation. I could be incorrect. But they also tried to give information for the highest good of the many while they were here, which is a clear sign of a progressive race. So I don't see them as negative. And I don't per se see the Guardian Alliances as negative either. I just see them as these incoming different stellar races that are trying to get their own people out and not really working for the majority of our solar system joint civilizations. Again, with the whole Atlantis project, because few of you could say what's left of the fourth cycle races are part of the old world order and the whole Draco. The Dracos are the top of the 410 pillar and all of these kind of things with the 10 Stargate, as the Kalontics called it, and the Dracos that come from that one that are called something else, which we now know as the Dracos, and they are not the Draconians. The Draconians are the re-engineered hybrids that we know from the 8th dimension of the Orion system, so that's something entirely else. They have this reptilian genetics, which are scavenger genetics, which are of the lizards, which are a hybrid race that were engineered of the original Draco genetics, but not the true pure strand, and therefore we can't call them Dracos. And the Dracos themselves, although having reptilian features, are shapeshifters and can look quite human if they choose to do so, because they used to look human. So they are not necessarily what we believe to be the reptilians. Again, this whole confusion where people are not able to read the genetic signature. But the Dracos themselves distance themselves from scavengers and lizards and reptilians and all of these semi-military project, half human, half reptilian things that the military projects have been tampering with, which we have seen replicated into different movies. Spider-Man is one of them, where there was a movie actually that I can't remember what it's called. It was the guy from the Avatar movie that I forgot what it was called. It was there on Netflix and then was taken off. I think it was a little bit too accurate, to be honest, because there they tried to adapt human genome to be able to exist on other planetary systems within our solar system using alien DNA. And that's some of the things that some of the secret levels, the fourth dimensional levels of some of the universities we have had, the ones that have been working with cloning and the whole kind of replication of DNA and using different animalistic and reptilian and insectoid type of genetics as an attempt to repair the human genome has definitely been participating unwillingly and unknowingly in these alien programs that's been going on, which has very little to do with information that's been given out there. I'll probably get smacked for giving this information because we've been pointing in a whole direction of all of that information that's been given about the reptilians and the different races that have been here. And the question is that actual information, or is this again just another false matrix information system that has been pushed into the collective using the free medium information systems as social media to get it out there so people would be focused in the wrong direction and not again being focused in the true regenerative end cycle dynamics and transition possibilities that most of us actually have if we are ready to do the deep clearing work in. And again, that is what I'm working with in the whole academy. So it's not for newcomers, it's definitely complicated information. But you always have different ends of the spectrum of people that are teaching. There are the ones that are teaching the sun is yellow, and then there are the ones that are teaching what the sun is actually made of and how it works and what the dynamics are and what the sciences are and how you can interact correctly with the sun if you want to do the adaptation processes and how you can actually create different types of triangles of energy, which does not go with the outer sun, but goes with the core construction of the sun and the original configurations of which the sun is the outer exemplification of, even though it is now in density 1 and it has begun its decay process. There are still higher level technologies behind that upholds the sun, which are not necessarily cube systems, but some other type of very advanced old universal structure technologies that goes with the group we know as the ancient ones. But this type of science and these technologies are being shifted out of our system because we have officially gone into what's called the end cycle. And that is where what cannot move forward in the elevation cycle will then be left behind in a more dense type of reality, which Collier talks about as well. I think that's in the ranch as well, that lecture where he shows these dynamics, which I think are very accurate. So the information that the Andromedans give on the ranch, I can only agree with. But again, it's read from their ability to read these disks. So if they are fifth dimensional, or if they are fourth dimensional in our interpretation of understanding, or they're from the fourth and the fifth cycle, whatever that equates with in their original system, which would be a different lineage and therefore a different type of universal structure, therefore not necessarily in alignment with our understanding of progression and human evolution, then we could say that, okay, we could say they have come in via the fifth dimension, not the artificial fifth dimension, but some kind of reconfiguration that adapts with the fifth cycle that are similar to the time before the fall of Atlantis. That's probably where I would put them. Even though they have used the fifth cycle dynamics now, and the question is, did they use Collier as a link up to be able to get that genetic configuration from where they could access? Again, question to be asked. And if they have used his current type of human genome to read the disk, what would they then get of information? Again, they adapt the information so it suits the ability that Collier at that time had to process that information, even though they educated him and gave him much more information. And I know there are discussions where Collier has that information from, and there is always this whether or not it's true and all these kind of things. That's the problem when people are not really good at pointing back to what they have worked with in their awakening process, which I think is one of the prominent features of science, is that they're always giving credit to where they have their basic information systems from. And when we talk about the Guardian Alliances and their understanding and reading of the discs, then that would also have been from their angle of purpose, what they came to do and what they wanted to convey to their groups on this planet. So when we work with these different information systems, and even though they say, oh, I've read it from the Akashic records, or I read it from the crystal discs that the Guardian Alliances had access to, or the Andromedans read the crystal disc that they had access to, it would still be within their workstations and within their sector. So we can't say that this information applies for all. And I'm working with some of these opposition dynamics in the whole transition science classes, where I try to teach you that if you do work with these different advanced teaching systems that comes from other races, then at least have the courtesy to understand that this is necessarily not the global truth, but it's a local truth that ties into specific groupings of genetics and consciousness structures that allows to read these crystal discs of the libraries from a specific sector that is linked up to a specific workstation, that is linked up to specific cyclic genetic information system that goes with specific levels of our progressive journey within the solar system, and thereby is not the accurate global universal information system, but is locally driven and is connected to local timelines, connected to local genetic configurations, as well as local teams and locals groupings and local what we could call developmental programs with which within these races were working to develop and restore their original consciousness configuration before the timeline event. And I know much of this will not make sense to many of you, but this is what I want to put out here on the 20th. That goes with what we could call a sort of judgment, the end of the month that ran from the 20th last month until this month before we begin a new month and go into spring. With the number 5 that goes with the knowledge, the inner knowledge, the true knowledge, the ability to work with knowledge, which goes with what it actually means to be an advanced civilization and what it actually means to be able to work with the construction, the worlds that you're part of, and what it means to recreate your original energy system from where you can work with energy to master the transformation of it to get back to your original configuration before the timeline event, as well as with the number 11 that goes with the sort of justice that goes within and saying what is necessary for these to be able to conquer the challenges of their end cycle and to justify and just do the whole kind of correct erection. And I'm here not talking about penal erection, but I'm talking about the recorrection and the resurrection of yourself as a fifth dimensional being, a fifth cyclic being, a fifth cycle being that are capable of standing in your circle you have created, you have engineered, and the technologies that you are able to connect to be able to recreate your own original configuration before the timeline event, the true energy system. And from that cycle, that sphere of your locality will be able to link to the different programs you have participated in. And from that, get the knowledge you need to be able to get back into who and what you truly are. That is, in my perspective, the true awakening process. Thank you.